My name is Paloma. I'm 18 years old and my family just officially erased me from their lives on the very day I graduated from high school. As I walked out of the auditorium, instead of getting a hug or a word of congratulations, I was handed an envelope. Inside was a guardianship transfer form. They didn't look me in the eye. They simply said, "You should start your own life now. Our family needs to focus on Sierra's future." Sierra, my twin sister, the one whose shadow I've been forced to live in my entire life. Have you ever felt like the extra child in your own family? Like no matter how hard you tried, you were just the replacement? If you've ever felt that way, share your thoughts in the comments. Like and subscribe to this channel to join me in uncovering the truth they tried to bury for 18 years. Because after that moment, everything was only just beginning. I still remember clearly the pictures hanging in our living room. An entire collection of ornate wooden frames lined up by year. On the left was our parents' wedding photo. At the center, Sierra, age 3, wearing a princess dress. Me. Sometimes I was in the frame, barely. Usually just the edge of my shoulder or my blurry face fading near the corner. In one Christmas photo, all I could see was the collar of my shirt poking out from behind Sierra's shining blonde curls. As if I had always been backstage helping set the scene for her perfect life. From 1st through 12th grade, birthdays were annual reminders that I was just a guest in my own life. Every year, our family threw a huge party for Sierra. Pink balloons, a 3-tier cake from the fanciest bakery in town, guests from school, neighbors, and her art classmates. Me. I helped Mom cut the cake, clean the table, and stood quietly in a corner, waiting for it all to end so I could sweep the floor. My parents always said, "Sierra is the older one, the firstborn daughter. She needs a little more attention." Even though I was born just 7 minutes later, I was always the little one in every definition they used. Whenever Mom introduced us, she'd smile, place a hand on Sierra's shoulder and say, "This is Sierra. And that's her younger sister, Paloma." That sentence, so casual, cut like paper. Simple, but it stung. I did well in school. Extremely well. In 4th grade, my teacher chose me to represent our class in the school-wide poetry reading contest. I rushed home, clutching the pale blue page with the printed poem, eager to tell Mom. She frowned and said, "Sierra's preparing for her piano recital. Don't distract her." That evening, the whole family gathered in the living room to watch Sierra rehearse, while I memorized my poem alone in the bathroom, the only room with light and silence. I didn't hate Sierra. Honestly, I used to admire her. She had bright blue eyes like autumn lakes, a voice as sweet as honey, and people adored her everywhere she went. I thought if I just tried harder, behaved better, got better grades, maybe, just maybe, my parents would look at me the way they looked at her. But that day never came. Once, Sierra got seriously ill right before the scholarship exams for an elite prep school. I remember it clearly. Early morning, Mom walked into my room holding Sierra's uniform. She didn't smile. She didn't ask if I was okay with it. She just said, "You'll take the test for Sierra today. The teacher won't notice. You two look alike." My mouth dropped open, heart pounding. "But, my name is Paloma." Mom cut me off. "No one cares. Your sister needs that scholarship. Don't be selfish." I put on Sierra's uniform, took the test under someone else's name, answered questions with a shaky voice and sweat-drenched palms. When I finished, I looked up and saw the small print, "Candidate, Sierra Monroe." I stood frozen for a while, then submitted the exam. I didn't cry. Not because it didn't hurt, but because the numbness was worse than tears. Sierra got the scholarship. The family celebrated for a week. Mom made her favorite beef stew, Dad uncorked a bottle of wine, Grandpa mailed a congratulatory card. Me. I sat at the corner of the table, chewing cold rice like I was swallowing all the words I never dared to say. Year after year, I lived like a ghost copy. I studied. I earned A's. I joined the academic team. But no one asked what I wanted, what I dreamed of. When I submitted an application for an SAT prep course, Mom said, "Don't waste money. Your sister needs high scores to get into a good university." I withdrew my application and studied by myself every night in the old shed behind our house. The only praise I ever got from Dad was when I fixed his office printer after it jammed for 3 weeks. He gave a slight nod and said, "You're not bad." I carried that sentence like a rare jewel in my heart. I once asked Sierra, during a power outage when we shared a bed in the dark, Do you ever feel like I'm treated differently? She turned away, paused, then said, "You're just better at getting people to pity you. I have to protect my place." I didn't reply. Maybe that's when I realized, even the person I admired most was never truly on my side. Life went on like that, quiet but marked with invisible cuts. I used to think I'd accept that fate forever. Until something unexpected arrived. A small letter tucked inside an old shoebox, and it lit the first spark that changed everything. That afternoon, rain fell lightly outside. I was cleaning my room for final exam season, folding winter clothes, wiping dusty corners I had ignored all spring. At the bottom of an old drawer, I found a faded brown shoebox, sealed with worn tape. No label, no name. Curious, I pulled it from beneath the books and placed it on my desk. Something about it made me hesitate. It didn't feel like anything else in the house. It felt hidden or abandoned on purpose. Slowly, I peeled back the tape and lifted the lid. Inside wasn't anything valuable, just a few yellowed photos, some smudged documents, and a manila envelope from Lakeview Memorial Hospital. My heart pounded at the sight of the blue medical stamp. I pulled out the papers with trembling hands. It was a birth certificate. But what stunned me wasn't my name, it was the small note beneath. Only surviving infant after preterm labor. Mother declined psychiatric support, referred to special adoption assistance within 24 hours. I flipped to the second page. Another document, an adoption certificate from the same hospital, listing the name Sierra Monroe with the admission date 1 day after I was born. Guardian, Isabel Monroe, accepted in special case after loss of firstborn. I sat there for a long time. No tears, no deep breaths, no reaction. It felt like the oxygen had been sucked out of the room. The world fell into eerie silence. I stared at the papers as if they might vanish if I blinked. So I was the biological child. I was born from my mother's body. And Sierra, the cherished one, the golden girl I had always chased after, was adopted. Taken in after the baby my mother lost. Then everything replayed in my head like a movie in reverse. Mom's gaze when Sierra laughed, like she was clutching something precious she'd once lost. The way she sat silently beside Sierra at the piano while I scrubbed the kitchen. Her blank stare when I won the statewide speech competition in 10th grade, followed by a casual, "Did Sierra have a good day at school?" I had never understood why I was treated like a stranger in my own family. Now I did. I clutched those 2 sheets of paper to my chest. I don't know how long I sat there. When night fell, I finally stood, carefully packed everything back into the box and slid it beneath my bed like I was burying a secret. But inside me, everything had shifted. That night at dinner, I watched Mom closely as she called Sierra down with her usual honeyed voice. And me, like always, had to guess when dinner started because no one ever called my name. As I sat at the table, she glanced at me once and said, "Don't forget to clear the dishes after, Paloma." I didn't answer. I stared directly at her. The way she avoided my eyes told me she remembered the box, and knew it was no longer where she left it. I turned to Sierra. She was talking about her new yoga class, hands moving excitedly like she was performing on stage. Dad listened intently. Mom nodded, asking follow-up questions like it was world-changing news. No one asked how my day had been. I set my fork down, washed my hands, and went straight to my room. Behind me, I heard Mom sigh. "What's she sulking about again?" No one asked why. No one cared. That night, I switched on my desk lamp, pulled out the 2 documents again and stared at them under the warm light. Then I opened my journal and wrote a single line. "If they won't see their own daughter, I'll find the life that belongs to me." That night, I couldn't sleep, not out of sadness, but because I knew I was about to begin a journey no one in my family ever saw coming. A journey not just to reclaim recognition, but to build a life where love didn't require anyone's permission. I left home on a Monday morning. No rolling suitcase, no slamming doors, no goodbyes. Just a small backpack on my shoulders, a few changes of clothes, 2 notebooks, and the shoebox full of forgotten secrets tucked under my jacket. I caught the earliest bus out of town, pressed my face to the foggy window and stared out blankly, like I had just walked through a storm but wasn't sure if I came out whole or already shattered. I didn't cry. Not because I was strong, but because I'd run out of tears a long time ago. My destination was Flagstaff, Arizona, where Uncle Gerald lived alone in a small wooden house outside the city. He was my mom's younger brother, once a firefighter, and the only person in our family who dared to defend me when I was 14, after a brutal argument with my mother. I had blurted out that I wished I'd never been born. Mom slapped me. Dad just stood there. Only Uncle Gerald called that same night and said, "You're not wrong for wanting fairness. Don't let them make you think you're a burden." After that, Mom cut off all contact with him. I never heard his name mentioned again. But I kept his number. And a week before I left, I called. When I said just 2 words, "It's me," he didn't ask why I was calling in the middle of the night, didn't demand an explanation. He simply said, "My door is always open." The bus stopped in front of an old post office on the edge of town, where dry grass swept around the stop like strands of pale gold under the sun. I pulled on my backpack and stepped off. Before I could even look around, I saw him, standing beside a worn red pickup truck, tall and lean in a rolled-up shirt, silver streaks in his hair, but his eyes still just as bright as the last time I saw him more than a decade ago. "Paloma." He called me by my real name, with no frown, no sigh, unlike what I was used to at home. I walked toward him, and before I could speak, he pulled me into a warm, firm hug. Not forced. Just right. His chest smelled of pine wood and ointment, a scent that made me feel safer than anywhere I'd ever been. We didn't talk much on the drive back. He played soft jazz on the radio, and I sat quietly, watching the desert stretch out through the window, where the sunset blazed more fiercely than any I'd ever seen. His house stood behind a grove of cypress trees, small but neat, with a wooden front porch and an old rocking chair creaking gently in the breeze. "This is your home now," he said, opening the door and letting me step inside first. No fancy bedroom, but a clean wooden bed, neatly folded blankets, and a window that looked out to the distant mountains. I set my backpack down and felt like I had taken off an invisible load I'd carried for 18 years. The days that followed passed quietly, but never without meaning. In the mornings, Uncle Gerald taught me how to change engine oil, recognize odd engine noises, check spark plugs, or change a tire in under 10 minutes. "A free girl shouldn't be afraid to pop the hood," he joked, his hands still stained with grease. I learned to cook too, not to serve someone else but to enjoy what I made with my own hands. My first dish was beef and potato stew, too salty, but he ate 2 bowls and said it was as good as the firehouse kitchen. In the afternoons, he told me stories. About running into flames to save lives, about the first wife he lost to cancer, about why he chose to live alone after the family shamed him for speaking out against his sister. But he never told these stories with bitterness, just like someone who had learned to let pain drift away like smoke in the wind. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the moon rise, I asked, "Why did you stand up for me back then, even when the whole family turned their backs on you?" He didn't look at me, just squinted at the sky. "Because I saw you. You were the only one in that house who wasn't pretending to be happy." I turned to him. "Was something wrong with me?" He chuckled softly. "No. It's because you were right that they got scared." From a girl who had always been forced to stay silent, I slowly began to find my voice. I got a part-time job at a small bookstore downtown. The owner, a sweet elderly lady named Miriam, called me Paloma the Brave. Every time I helped a customer find the perfect book, she'd wink at me like she was acknowledging something bigger than just my work. I started writing down everything I was learning in a new notebook. Not school stuff, but real-life lessons. How to listen to yourself. How to face the past without letting it define you. And most importantly, how to love yourself like you deserved it from the very beginning. I no longer felt like anyone's defective shadow. Here, under Uncle Gerald's sunlit porch, in days filled with quiet and no need to explain, I began to see a new version of myself, clearer, stronger, and no longer needing anyone's permission to live with dignity. I applied to retake the college entrance exam on a chilly early spring night, while the Flagstaff mountain wind whispered outside and Uncle Gerald's old country radio played faintly in the kitchen. It wasn't an easy decision. I had to fight old fears. Fear of rejection, fear I wasn't good enough, fear that maybe all those hurtful words I grew up hearing were true. But I did it anyway. I sat alone, sipping lukewarm hot cocoa, and filled in every blank on the application. In the personal essay section, I didn't write about achievements or hard work. I wrote about growing up in a house where I was always the leftover, and how I learned to prove my worth without waiting for someone else's validation. 3 months later, I got an email from the University of Washington. They didn't just accept me. They offered a full-ride scholarship in software engineering. I read that letter at least 5 times before I believed it was real. Uncle Gerald drove home the moment I called him, carrying a bottle of ginger soda and a homemade pie. "You did it," he said, patting my shoulder. "Not for anyone else. For you." We moved to Seattle together in mid-August. He rented a small apartment near campus to help me settle in. Though he didn't live with me, he visited every weekend, bringing groceries and checking in. The place was barely 400 square feet, but it was the first space that truly felt like mine. I hung photos of me and Uncle Gerald, pinned up quotes that inspired me, and used a small whiteboard to jot down random ideas as they came. I also got a part-time job at a cafe on Union Street, not far from campus housing. The owner, Mrs. Ellison, was a silver-haired woman with a tight bun and warm, serious eyes. On our first meeting, she looked at my resume and said, "You can pour coffee, but can you listen to people?" I replied, "I think everyone wants to be seen, to be heard, even if all they ask for is a shot of espresso." She nodded. 2 weeks trial. If it works, you stay. He kept me after 4 days. That job taught me more than just how to pour the perfect latte or memorize regulars' names. I learned how to notice people's habits, how crowds shifted by the hour, how the paper order tickets stacked up fast during morning rush. I watched every detail and began to think, what if I could program something to help this place run smoother? The idea struck on a busy Saturday morning when the printer jammed during peak hours. Chaos. Staff scrambled, customers got impatient, paper scattered everywhere. After the shift, I asked Mrs. Ellison, if I built a simple app to display orders directly on a tablet, would you want to try it? She raised an eyebrow. "I don't understand tech." I smiled. "I understand enough for both of us." I spent the following nights writing my first lines of code. Nothing fancy, nothing flawless, but it worked. The app had just 3 functions: enter orders, display them in real time, and chime if any sat for more than 10 minutes. But the impact was immediate. Staff moved faster. Mistakes dropped. Customers got what they ordered when they expected it. 3 weeks later, Mrs. Ellison called me into the tiny back office. On her desk was a cream-colored envelope. "I don't usually invest, but I see you, and I believe in you." Inside was a check for $10,000. I couldn't breathe. "What do you want me to do with this?" I asked, voice trembling. "I'm not buying your software," she said. "I'm investing in you. Keep doing what you're doing. But this time, go all in." I went home, placed that check on the table like it might float away if I blinked. I thought of all the years I'd been overlooked, dismissed, told I'd never be enough. And yet here was someone who shared no blood with me, choosing to believe in me without hesitation. I used that money to develop the app into a complete version. I studied more about user interface design, hired a graphic design student to help me create a logo, and optimized the app's performance. I named it BrewTrack, short, easy to remember, and true to its core, tracking real-time orders for small coffee shops. After 3 months of testing at Mrs. Ellison's cafe, I was invited by 2 other shops in the same neighborhood to do a demo. Once again, I didn't need anyone to call my name. I was proving myself, step by step, line by line of code, cup by cup, served right on time. And the strange thing was, I didn't have to push myself to the brink just to be seen. I just had to be myself. And that turned out to be enough. The message came on a rainy night in mid-September while I was sitting in my usual cafe in Seattle, working on a new update for BrewTrack. My phone vibrated softly beside the laptop, lighting up with a name I hadn't seen in nearly 2 years. Sierra. "Paloma, please read this. I need help. Everything is falling apart." I stared at the message for a long time, feeling something stir inside me. Not exactly pain, not quite anger, but a strange sensation of someone who had once been left behind suddenly being called on. I didn't respond right away. I shut the laptop, slipped my phone into my bag, and quietly left the cafe. I needed time to understand why she had turned to me, someone the family had once made invisible. That night I didn't sleep. I lay in the dark, thinking about the years that had passed, about the last time I saw Sierra, sitting in the back of a taxi with our parents, waving brightly as they headed to the airport for Hawaii, while I stood at the front door, left behind with the words, "Someone needs to stay and watch the house." Those images never faded. I had just learned not to let them take over my mind. But now Sierra was back. And not to celebrate me or apologize. She was asking for help. I opened my phone, tapped into the old chat, and typed, "Are you okay?" Not long after, 3 messages came in rapid succession. Mom and Dad mortgaged the house to pay for my studies in London. I couldn't make it past the first semester. The pressure was overwhelming. I failed 3 classes. My ex is threatening to sue me over a joint loan, and I have nowhere to go. I set the phone down on the table. That old feeling came rushing back. The feeling of being placed in a no-win situation where if I said no, I'd be the villain. But if I said yes, I'd go right back to the old role, carrying the consequences of other people's choices. I told Uncle Gerald about it that weekend when he came to visit. We were baking on the porch, the rain had just stopped, and the scent of damp pine and orange peels drifted in the breeze. "You'd better ask yourself first, are you ready for this?" he said, placing the baking tray on the wooden table. "I don't know," I admitted. Part of me wants to say, I once cried out for help too and no one reached out. But another part sees her alone somewhere, scared, defeated, just like I was 2 years ago. He was quiet for a while, then said, "Kindness isn't an obligation. It's a choice. And that choice can come from compassion or from wisdom. As long as you don't let it pull you back into the place you fought so hard to escape." I agreed to meet Sierra at a small diner near the Fremont neighborhood. When I walked in, she was already there, sitting in the corner, pale-faced, her once sleek hair now limp, hands clasped around a cup of cold tea. "Paloma," she looked at me, her voice trembling. "Thank you for coming." I sat down, saying nothing. Not out of anger, but because I needed her to speak first. "I don't know where to start," she said. "Everything unraveled after you left. Mom and Dad said they'd take care of everything, but they hid the fact that the house was foreclosed because of the tuition mortgage. Then my ex, he tricked me into co-signing a loan for a photography studio and disappeared with the money. Now I have nothing." I looked at her. The proud posture was gone, the half-smile from her beach photos in Waikiki erased. "I'm sorry you went through that," I said slowly. "But I don't know where I fit into all of this." Sierra lowered her head. "I don't know either. I just had no one else to call." "What about Mom and Dad?" I asked. She let out a bitter laugh. "Dad's trying to sell his antique watch to cover some penalties. Mom called me a burden who doesn't try hard enough." "Didn't they ever say that to you?" I stayed silent. I remembered those familiar words. But now, sitting here, I was no longer the child hoping for a hug from a mother who always kept both arms free for the other daughter. "Why me, Sierra?" I asked. "After everything, why come to me?" She looked up, eyes rimmed red. "Because you were the only one who ever really saw me. Not the image Mom and Dad painted. Not the perfect act I was forced to keep up for 18 years. I know I had everything and you had so much taken from you. But when everything collapsed, I realized you were always the stronger one." I looked at her for a long time. Her words didn't erase the past, but they stirred something quiet inside me. I couldn't yet call it forgiveness. But I knew I was beginning to see this story from a new angle. Not as the abandoned child, but as someone who stood back up and kept walking. And she was finally looking at me as a person, not a shadow. I had just returned to my apartment after a morning shift, not even changed out of my uniform, when my phone rang. The caller ID said, "Home." I stared at it for a few seconds, then answered, not surprised but with a small hope that maybe they'd say something different. Mom's voice came first. No greeting, no warm-up. "Paloma, I need to talk to you seriously. Sierra's in a bad place. She has no place to stay, no income, and she's tangled in that ridiculous lawsuit. Can you let her stay with you for a while? Just a few months, until she gets back on her feet." I stayed quiet, listening to her shallow breathing on the other end. It wasn't the sound of concern. It was the sound of someone losing control of a chess piece. "I don't think that's a good idea," I said slowly. "My apartment's small. I'm juggling school and part-time work. And besides, Sierra and I were never exactly compatible." Mom let out a long sigh, like I'd just said no to something unreasonably reasonable. "You have a company now, right? Some app. I heard someone invested like tens of thousands of dollars in you. You can easily help her a little." My brows furrowed. "Where did you hear that?" "Good news travels fast. Mrs. Ellison's been bragging about you all over the neighborhood. You should be grateful to have someone like her around. And now, if you're really grown up and responsible, then you should help your sister. She's in crisis." I took a deep breath, steadying my voice. I was in crisis once too. Remember? When I stood at the door holding my acceptance letter as valedictorian, And you were too busy packing for Hawaii. When I asked to take SAT prep classes and you said it was a waste of money because Sierra needs the score more. When you told me I should move out so I wouldn't hold back Sierra's future. Where were you then? Mom was silent for 3 full seconds. Then her voice shot up, sharp as a blade. You owe this family, Paloma. You stole the place that should have been Sierra's. If it weren't for you, she wouldn't have had to carry the weight just to hold on to love that should have been hers. I gripped the phone tightly, my heart pounding, not out of fear but because those words, though painful, finally confirmed what I had always felt but never dared name. To Mom, I was never the forgotten daughter. I was the thorn, the usurper. The reason they had to settle for someone else to fill the void. You're saying that my very existence is a mistake? I asked, my voice quiet but firm. No, my mother hesitated, then stopped. What I mean is, things would have been different if there had only been one child. Silence swallowed both ends of the call. I could hear the sound of my own heart sinking, each beat like a heavy stone dropping into a lake. I used to think I was strong enough to face any words thrown at me. But when the woman who gave birth to you says life would have been better without you, there's no wound that can ever truly heal from that. I took a deep breath to steady my voice before I spoke. Then I'll give you exactly that. From now on, I won't be a part of your choices anymore. Paloma, don't you dare be disrespectful, she snapped, but I had already hung up. I sat quietly in the small kitchen, afternoon sunlight streaming through the white curtains like a fine layer of dust made of truth. I thought back to all the times I swallowed my sighs, my tears, and even my longing to be loved, just so I wouldn't burden them. And all those sacrifices came down to one final statement. You stole the place that belonged to my daughter. I opened the cabinet and pulled out the notebook where I jotted down my thoughts each day. I wrote a single sentence in the middle of a blank page. No one steals someone else's place. Some people just don't have the courage to love fairly. Then I closed the notebook and made myself a cup of hot tea. Not to soothe anyone else but to remind myself that I still had me. And that's the only thing they no longer had the power to define. The invitation arrived by mail, cream envelope sealed with red wax, the handwriting round and precise. Aunt Martha, my father's sister, the perennial family coordinator for events. You and Sierra are invited to the 60th wedding anniversary of your grandparents. We hope both of you can join us. I read the card once, then set it down and sat in silence the rest of the afternoon. At first, I had no intention of going. I saw no reason to return to a house full of crystal chandeliers but void of warmth, where I had always been seated at the kids' table while Sierra was brought on stage to sing her favorite song. But then I thought again. Not to reconcile. Not to hurt anyone. Just because I no longer had any reason to hide. And some truths, if we don't speak them, will be buried forever like they never existed. I arrived at the party in a midnight blue Tesla Model Y, the gift from the Seattle venture firm after they invested $2 million into BrewTrack. It was the reward for a year of nearly non-stop work. Scaling the app, expanding to new markets, hiring staff, writing hundreds of lines of code each night while my friends went hiking or partying. But when I pulled up in front of my grandparents' mansion in Bellevue, it wasn't the car that silenced the crowd. It was me. Me, the girl they used to forget during family gatherings, stepping out of the car in a deep blue dress, hair neatly pinned, face calm. Not flashy. Not forced. Just me. Uncle Tom was the first to notice. Paloma? Is that really you? I nodded slightly and shook his hand. I came to celebrate Grandpa and Grandma. I hope today will be memorable. Whispers rippled through the air. Eyes turned my way. A few people approached to chat, maybe out of curiosity. I saw Aunt Martha hesitantly walking over. We're so glad you came. People always ask about you. I smiled lightly. Funny. I don't recall getting many calls these past years. She looked taken aback, then stepped aside as someone appeared behind me, Sierra. She wore a plain white dress, her face noticeably thinner, eyes dark and tired. When she saw me, she froze for a few seconds. Not because she was surprised, but because she didn't know how to act. I nodded as a greeting. She mumbled, "Thank you for coming." I didn't respond. I simply walked inside. The party was exactly what I remembered. Formal, proper, overflowing with beautiful dishes and soft music. But beneath that warm golden lighting were stolen glances and questions too sharp to be spoken aloud. When our grandparents stood up to give their thank you speech, Aunt Martha took the mic and announced, "We'll now have an open floor. Anyone who'd like to share something with the couple, please feel free." I don't know what pushed me to stand. I just knew that the moment I stepped into the center of the room, the whole hall went quiet. I held the mic, scanning a sea of familiar yet distant faces. "My name is Paloma," I began, my voice steadier than I expected. "I'm the younger daughter of Isabel and Richard Monroe. Also Sierra's twin sister." Some people nodded. Others exchanged puzzled looks, unsure why I was stating the obvious. But for the first 18 years of my life, I was never called daughter. I was the other one, the shadow behind another child who was loved, cared for, and burdened with all their hopes. Everything I got, from birthday cake to a glance from my mother, was always a little less. Though born just 7 minutes later, I was never treated as an equal half. The room froze. My mother, seated near the window, clenched the armrest. My father turned away, staring at the chandelier. I went on. For years I didn't understand why. Until I found a box hidden in the closet. Inside were birth records and adoption papers. That's when I realized I was their biological child. And Sierra had been adopted after my mother's first premature delivery ended in loss. A rustle echoed through the hall. Eyes shifted from me to the table where my parents sat. Aunt Martha grabbed my grandfather's trembling hand. "I'm sorry," Sierra's voice rose behind me. "Paloma is telling the truth. She's not making any of it up." I turned around. Her eyes were red, voice shaky, like she was carrying a weight she had never dared lift before. I was the one in the golden cage. I knew I wasn't talented or strong like Paloma. But I wasn't given a choice. I was cast into a role. And only when I failed did I finally see who really knew how to live. I didn't need to say more. The story had spoken for itself. I placed the mic on the table and stepped back as the entire room sank into silence. No one clapped. No one laughed. But I knew the truth had been placed before them like a massive mirror. Whoever dared look would see just how complicit they had been in the unfairness. I just felt light. Lighter than I'd ever felt inside that house. I left that family gathering not with stinging eyes, but with my head high, free from resentment. I woke up the next morning to over 30 messages and 7 missed calls. My voicemail was full. Mom, Aunt Martha, even the aunt who never remembered my name had left messages. The first text was from Mom. "Paloma, I'm sorry. I didn't think you'd say it out loud. But I understand why you did. I was wrong. I just want you to know, I never stopped loving you." Attached was a video. I tapped to play. In it, my mother sat in front of a webcam, her eyes sunken, hair loose and messy, voice trembling. "I was wrong. I didn't see you. I was haunted by the loss of my first pregnancy, and when we adopted Sierra, I thought she could fill that gap. But I didn't realize. I created another emptiness, the one between you and me." I watched the entire video. No pause. No fast forward. No tears. I sat quietly long after the screen faded to black. Then I opened my laptop and typed a single email. "I'm no longer the child begging for love. I built myself. And that's something you never did for me." I hit send. Then one by one I blocked every phone number, email, and social media account connected to my parents. Not out of anger, but because I was exhausted with the cycle. They hurt. I forgive. They repeat. I stay silent. I wasn't staying silent. And I wasn't going back. That night, I told Uncle Gerald everything as we had dinner in my little apartment. He set his chopsticks down, listened quietly without interrupting. When I reached the part about the final email, he smiled gently. "You wrote it beautifully," he said. "Clear, firm, but not cruel. That's how grown-ups speak about old pain, with finality, not shouting." I leaned back in my chair and let out a sigh. "I don't feel triumphant, Uncle. Just empty." "That's because you're finally putting down a burden that was never yours to carry," he said. "It leaves behind a space. But that space isn't something to fear. It's room to grow something new." That night, I opened my inbox, cleared out every junk message, unfollowed anything linked to them. I even changed all my social media passwords, like closing a door I had left wide open for years. No one would walk through again unless they truly knew how to protect what's in my heart. A week later, I received a small express delivery from an unfamiliar address. I hesitated before opening it. Inside was a handwritten letter from Sierra. Paloma, you don't have to forgive me. I'm not expecting that. I just wanted to say, you were never anyone's shadow. You were the light from the very beginning. Me. I've lived under fake brightness for far too long. I won't send anything else. But if someday you want to hear my apology in person, I'll be here. I folded the letter and placed it in my desk drawer without replying. I didn't hate her anymore. I didn't want to erase every connection either. But I needed to let myself live without being dragged back by the past. Forgiveness, if it comes, won't arrive through a letter or a phone call. It'll come the day I feel no sting when that old wound is named aloud. That morning, I arrived at the office earlier than usual. My coworkers greeted me with a respectful nod. I stood in front of the quarterly strategy board and added a new line in red ink. Next phase. Expand multi-location store management features. No one else understood what that note meant beyond work. But for me, it was a reminder I was moving forward. Not to prove anything to anyone, but because I had finally stepped out of my own shadow and into a light I lit myself. I arrived in San Francisco on a summer afternoon. The sky was so clear it looked polished with silk, and the breeze from the bay carried the salty scent of the sea up every steep street. My first office was on the third floor of a renovated building, with windows so large we didn't need lights during the day. The ocean was just a few blocks away, close enough that I could hear the waves hitting the rocks whenever I opened the windows. The attic apartment I rented was just 600 square feet, with low wooden ceilings and a creaky floor. But it had a small balcony facing the sea, where I placed a wicker chair and a simple wooden tea table. That spot became my favorite. Every early morning and late night I sat there with a leather notebook, a cup of mint tea, and something I never believed I'd reach before: peace. My company, BrewTrack, had grown to 5 full-time team members and 2 intern developers. We worked in a tidy, shared space, exchanging everything from ideas to brown bag lunches. No one here asked me about my family. No one cared what lineage I came from. They looked at me as the founder, the one who dared to build something from nothing, from pain, and turned it into something of real value. I still worked like always, coding, debugging, client meetings, market surveys. But alongside that, I began writing. Not code, but life pages. At first, the book was just for me, a way to piece together memories. But the more I wrote, the clearer it became that there were hundreds, thousands of people like me out there. Kids who were once dimmed inside their own families, who believed they were flawed drafts, who exhausted themselves just to be seen. I wanted them to read something that could pull them out of the dark. I wasn't writing to brag or to blame. I wrote to say, even the forgotten ones can choose to live clearly. I titled the draft, "The Light Beyond the Shadow." Each chapter was a slice. Like the night I overheard my parents saying they wished there'd only been one child, the morning I left home without looking back, the first time I heard praise that didn't come with comparison. I didn't hide my scars. I let them show, exactly as they were. Because truth isn't something to avoid. It reminds us what we've lived through, and how we rose above it. I didn't expect anyone to publish it. I wrote it as a form of cleansing. So when I received an email from a major New York publishing house, I had to read it 3 times to believe it was real. "We came across your manuscript through your personal blog. Our editorial team feels this is more than just a memoir. It's a voice for a part of this generation. If you're interested, we'd like to discuss publishing options." I read that line under the morning sunlight, with the soft sound of waves in the distance and the clink of a porcelain cup hitting a biscuit plate. I didn't laugh or cheer. I just sat there, looked out at the sea, and smiled, a quiet smile that reached all the way down. Not for anyone else. Not to be seen. Not to be shared. Just a moment when I knew I had chosen the right path. That afternoon, I brought my notebook to my favorite seaside cafe, the one with light gray cushions and tables right next to tall windows. I ordered an iced latte and watched strangers pass by, each carrying a story I'd never know. But I knew this much: each of them had probably lived a chapter like mine. And if they were lucky, they'd find the next one, the one where they held the pen. That evening, I called Uncle Gerald. He picked up after 2 rings. "You doing okay?" he asked. "I just got an email from a publisher. They want to print my book." There was a pause. Then he laughed, a warm, low sound I knew well. "You know, Paloma, you've come a long way. And now, your voice is guiding those still lost." I replied softly, "I'm not just writing about pain, Uncle. I'm writing about choice. That we can walk out of the past without turning around. He simply said, and that's what sets you apart. I ended the call and stood in front of the mirror, looking at myself, not the girl who once waited for her mother's praise, or bowed her head every time someone called her the other one. Now I was Paloma, a woman who named her own happiness without waiting for anyone else to hand it to her. Each of us carries a story, a journey to find our true place in this world. Mine is just one among countless others. Stories of forgotten children who worked themselves to the bone just to be seen by the very people who were supposed to love them first. What about you? Have you ever felt like a shadow in your own home? Like your feelings weren't worth hearing? If this story sparked anything in you, a memory, a thought, or a quiet emotion you never named, I'd love to hear it in the comments. And if you believe everyone deserves to be heard and loved fairly, don't forget to follow this channel. There are many more stories to come, honest, moving, and sometimes hard to hear, about family, about choices, and about how we find our way back to ourselves. I leaned back in my chair and let out a sigh. I don't feel triumphant, Uncle. Just empty. That's because you're finally putting down a burden that was never yours to carry, he said. It leaves behind a space. But that space isn't something to fear. It's room to grow something new. That night, I opened my inbox, cleared out every junk message, unfollowed anything linked to them. I even changed all my social media passwords, like closing a door I had left wide open for years. No one would walk through again unless they truly knew how to protect what's in my heart. A week later, I received a small express delivery from an unfamiliar address. I hesitated before opening it. Inside was a handwritten letter from Sierra. Paloma, you don't have to forgive me. I'm not expecting that. I just wanted to say, you were never anyone's shadow. You were the light from the very beginning. Me. I've lived under fake brightness for far too long. I won't send anything else. But if someday you want to hear my apology in person, I'll be here. I folded the letter and placed it in my desk drawer without replying. I didn't hate her anymore. I didn't want to erase every connection either. But I needed to let myself live without being dragged back by the past. Forgiveness, if it comes, won't arrive through a letter or a phone call. It'll come the day I feel no sting when that old wound is named aloud. That morning, I arrived at the office earlier than usual. My coworkers greeted me with a respectful nod. I stood in front of the quarterly strategy board and added a new line in red ink. Next phase. Expand multi-location store management features. No one else understood what that note meant beyond work. But for me, it was a reminder. I was moving forward. Not to prove anything to anyone, but because I had finally stepped out of my own shadow and into a light I lit myself. I arrived in San Francisco on a summer afternoon. The sky was so clear it looked polished with silk, and the breeze from the bay carried the salty scent of the sea up every steep street. My first office was on the third floor of a renovated building, with windows so large we didn't need lights during the day. The ocean was just a few blocks away, close enough that I could hear the waves hitting the rocks whenever I opened the windows. The attic apartment I rented was just 600 square feet, with low wooden ceilings and a creaky floor. But it had a small balcony facing the sea, where I placed a wicker chair and a simple wooden tea table. That spot became my favorite. Every early morning and late night, I sat there with a leather notebook, a cup of mint tea, and something I never believed I'd reach before: peace. My company, BrewTrack, had grown to 5 full-time team members and 2 intern developers. We worked in a tidy, shared space, exchanging everything from ideas to brown bag lunches. No one here asked me about my family. No one cared what lineage I came from. They looked at me as the founder, the one who dared to build something from nothing, from pain, and turned it into something of real value. I still worked like always, coding, debugging, client meetings, market surveys. But alongside that, I began writing. Not code, but life pages. At first, the book was just for me, a way to piece together memories. But the more I wrote, the clearer it became that there were hundreds, thousands of people like me out there. Kids who were once dimmed inside their own families, who believed they were flawed drafts, who exhausted themselves just to be seen. I wanted them to read something that could pull them out of the dark. I wasn't writing to brag or to blame. I wrote to say, even the forgotten ones can choose to live clearly. I titled the draft, "The Light Beyond the Shadow." Each chapter was a slice. Like the night I overheard my parents saying they wished there'd only been one child, the morning I left home without looking back, the first time I heard praise that didn't come with comparison. I didn't hide my scars. I let them show, exactly as they were. Because truth isn't something to avoid. It reminds us what we've lived through, and how we rose above it. I didn't expect anyone to publish it. I wrote it as a form of cleansing. So when I received an email from a major New York publishing house, I had to read it 3 times to believe it was real. We came across your manuscript through your personal blog. Our editorial team feels this is more than just a memoir. It's a voice for a part of this generation. If you're interested, we'd like to discuss publishing options. I read that line under the morning sunlight, with the soft sound of waves in the distance and the clink of a porcelain cup hitting a biscuit plate. I didn't laugh or cheer. I just sat there, looked out at the sea and smiled, a quiet smile that reached all the way down. Not for anyone else. Not to be seen. Not to be shared. Just a moment when I knew I had chosen the right path. That afternoon, I brought my notebook to my favorite seaside cafe, the one with light gray cushions and tables right next to tall windows. I ordered an iced latte and watched strangers pass by, each carrying a story I'd never know. But I knew this much. Each of them had probably lived a chapter like mine. And if they were lucky, they'd find the next one, the one where they held the pen. That evening, I called Uncle Gerald. He picked up after 2 rings. "You doing okay?" he asked. "I just got an email from a publisher. They want to print my book." There was a pause. Then he laughed, a warm, low sound I knew well. "You know, Paloma, you've come a long way. And now, your voice is guiding those still lost." I replied softly, "I'm not just writing about pain, Uncle. I'm writing about choice. That we can walk out of the past without turning around." He simply said, "And that's what sets you apart." I ended the call and stood in front of the mirror, looking at myself, not the girl who once waited for her mother's praise, or bowed her head every time someone called her the other one. Now I was Paloma, a woman who named her own happiness without waiting for anyone else to hand it to her. Each of us carries a story, a journey to find our true place in this world. Mine is just one among countless others. Stories of forgotten children who worked themselves to the bone just to be seen by the very people who were supposed to love them first. What about you? Have you ever felt like a shadow in your own home? Like your feelings weren't worth hearing? If this story sparked anything in you, a memory, a thought, or a quiet emotion you never named, I'd love to hear it in the comments. And if you believe everyone deserves to be heard and loved fairly, don't forget to follow this channel. There are many more stories to come, honest, moving, and sometimes hard to hear, about family, about choices, and about how we find our way back to ourselves. Because sometimes just hearing someone else's story helps you start writing your own.